I can't see. Oh, well, now I can see myself. Sorry about that. And I was just reflecting on how extremely punctual and efficient all this has been. As an Anglican, I'm used to working either side of the hour, but very rarely actually on it. Anyway, welcome back. I hope you are revived by coffee, tea, or the beverage of your choice, and ready to hear the Bishop of Norwich, Graham Usher, give his interpretation of pilgrimage. It's really interesting to see how this subject captures the imaginations of people in such very different ways. Anyway, we will hear Bishop Graham speak, and then as with the other two, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions using the comment facility, and then join in the live discussion after the recorded talk. So over to you, Bishop.
Thank you for the invitation to speak at this creative and life-giving festival, even if it feels so different. Lockdown has been a challenging experience for many, many people, with its twists and turns of policy and demand. It's been difficult to remember what was originally required of us. But back on the 23rd of March, the Prime Minister addressed the nation saying, that is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited reasons: shopping for basic necessities, one form of exercise a day, for example, a run, a walk, cycle, any medical need to provide care, or travelling to and from work, but only when absolutely necessary. That's all, he said. These are the only reasons you should leave your home. People really appreciated their daily exercise. For me, it wasn't too much of a hardship. I love to get out walking, and I've come to realize that walking is very much a part of my own spiritual life. I heard some people speaking about how they were noticing the arrival of spring. They'd never really seen it before. How they heard birdsong more. And there were various online videos of wildlife entering our towns and cities: goats in Llandudno, kangaroos in Sydney, dolphins in Venice, and I even saw a video of the Loch Ness Monster wandering around in Inverness. So walking is one of those simple things that we do as humans. It's the way most of us experience life. As the oldest mode of transport, our ancestors crossed the earth on foot and walked themselves into being. For most people, walking has passed from the realm of daily necessity to that of leisure and choice. Though, of course, for many, many millions of people around the world, it's not a choice. They simply have to walk to collect firewood or water every day. But it does bring pleasure, joy, happiness, serenity. And I find that walking refreshes me as well as slowing me down. That gentle movement relaxes my body while the rhythm gives me time to think. So that those complex thoughts and worries that swirl around my head become somewhat clearer. Only last week, the day before my son was off onto the next stage of his life, I noticed we were both being a bit tetchy one with another. And I suggested a walk. That was roundly denied. But then later we did go off for a walk, and we spoke to the dogs for the first mile. But by the third and the fourth, we were speaking to each other and having a great conversation. Thanks for that, Dad, as we got home. And I think walking helps with good conversations. I think it also helps with difficult conversations, or where there's a great nervousness. In ministry, I found that walking with people, literally and metaphorically, can be really advantageous. Who knows, perhaps a third person is joining us and opening our minds to see things a little differently. Solvitur ambulando, said St. Augustine, or perhaps it was St. Jerome. There's a bit of a dispute about that. It is solved by walking. So when I'm in a stew, when work and life are getting too much for me, when I'm not thinking clearly or just feeling very, very fuzzy-headed, when I'm exhausted or fearful or feeling low, I walk and I walk and I walk. And I find a resonance in the Scottish poet Thomas A. Clarke's words. There are walks on which I lose myself, walks which return me to myself again. In that rhythm of foot before foot, solo or in the company of others, I find that work and life, thought and mind become increasingly harmonious. I find myself walking, in a sense, into the depths of my own humanity. And walking helps me to pray, leads me to encounter God. It's as if I have a companion at my side or up in front, leading me on at times, or whispering from behind, encouraging me to take the step I dare not take, but perhaps need to. Perhaps it's the rhythm of things as I see things around me that sparks the things to pray for, and the chain of connections that results in. Or the rhythm leads to a meditative kind of prayer as I fit the words of the Jesus prayer to my stride, or my stride becomes the Jesus prayer. Walking can lead me to feeling more fully alive. It can also stir up. I need to be alert to the anger and frustrations and insecurities and those demon-sized ghosts of the imagination that can build as I move from walking to kind of stomping the ground underfoot at times. And I guess my starting point to reflect on walking and pilgrimage is to see the pattern of Jesus's life. He walked a lot. Even before he was born, Mary carried him as she climbed up to the hill country where her cousin Elizabeth lived. A decade or more later, Mary and Joseph, returning from Jerusalem, thought that their son was ahead as part of the walking caravan of pilgrims, not knowing that he had stayed behind in the temple. And during the rest of his life in and around Nazareth as an itinerant carpenter and rabbi on pilgrimages to Jerusalem, or for an intensive period of 3 or so years, Jesus walked the highways and the byways of the Galilee, and even on the sea itself. He encouraged his disciples to walk with him. He taught them, he healed the sick by the side of the road, and those who were unable to walk began to walk. He kept doing things and encountering people, as the Gospels put it, as he was going or as he walked. And he told his disciples that when they were not welcome by a community, they should shake the dust off their feet and walk on. His emphasis, of course, was always on noticing people who hadn't been noticed. He walked towards people, inviting them to discover life in all its abundance, saying, "Come, follow me." And so I wonder, what are the conversations we have along the way on our pilgrimages? How, I wonder, might they shape us, be gifts to us, change the very pattern of our day? The theologian Dan Hardy summed this up by describing Jesus walking step by step through the land. And after every set of steps, he met someone, stood by someone, one-to-one, and in some way he touched and healed each one. Jesus was also deeply connected to the land he walked and the soil beneath his feet. He observed the plants that withered under the scorching sun, the lilies, the choking thistles, the size of the mustard bushes, the lack of fruit on a fig tree, and the grain in the fields ready to be winnowed in the hand and eaten on a Sabbath day's journey. He listened to those he walked with, picked up the nuance of their conversation, spotted the trick question and challenged the conceit of those who wanted greatness and honour. As one pilgrim along the Camino reflected, the road was where Jesus was to be found. It was his classroom, his podium, his laboratory, and his sanctuary. So I wonder if that is part of the joy of pilgrimage for us, noticing, paying attention to self and to others, to landscape and buildings, to the small things, and to the wide skies and the clouds, the very landscape, absorbing it all, embracing it, whilst also allowing time to be lost in it. And at times the gospel writers talk about how Jesus takes himself off to be lost in the landscape, off to be lonely to deserted places, to pray, often up a mountain, echoing Moses' ascent to speak with God. It's in these walks that he recharged himself and found intimacy with God the Father amidst the whole of creation. And in my mind's eye, I see him gulping the air as he climbs higher up the hillside, sweat on his brow, arms flung wide in joy as he senses a freedom from the eyes of the crowd, always fixed upon him, and that outpouring of praise and prayer from his lips. For our filled lives and our overfilled demands, where might our daily pilgrimage take us to a place of freedom so as to simply be, to be simply? Where are the places where we can encounter the silence of prayer and the prayer of silence? Yet, of course, soon Jesus was to set his face to go to Jerusalem, to walk to the cross, to death and to resurrection. And on the night that he was handed over, Jesus took a towel and wrapped it around his waist. He knelt down and took the sweaty, dirty, calloused feet of each of his disciples in turn. Water was poured, feet were cleaned of the mud of the road and whatever else had been stood in. Of course, the city was filled with Passover pilgrims and Passover lambs. Then those feet were carefully dried, perhaps even tenderly touched, as a woman had massaged Jesus' own feet using a jar of costly ointment. In this simple practicing of a lowly job, usually reserved for a slave in the household, Jesus showed the disciples that no one is above serving others, not even the Messiah. I wonder what our church might be like if he had said that night, "Do this in remembrance of me." The disciples' feet are as precious as the minds he will illuminate. The hands that Jesus will hold, the mouths that he will feed, and the hearts that he will warm. Here, the Word made flesh stooped to take the grubby, smelly stuff of the world, the bruised flesh, and to show how and why the Word is with us. God humbly walking with us, willing to be earthed in the stuff of the world. And following his trial, while disciples fled in fear and Peter disowned him, Jesus was led out on an exhausting solitary walk through the teeming streets of Jerusalem. And very soon he needed someone to help him carry the cross on that last stumbling trudge. And on that green hill far away outside the city wall, he was nailed down, pinned to wood, so that he was unable to walk any longer. And yet, in the resurrection appearances, two Marys clung to the risen Jesus' feet. He showed his disciples not only his hands, but also his pierced feet. And he joined two of his followers on a mournful walk to Emmaus. The Japanese theologian Kosuke Koyama spoke of how God walks slowly because he's love. He wrote this: if he's not love, he would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It's an inner speed. It's a spiritual speed. It's a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are accustomed. It is slow, yet it is our Lord over all other speeds, since it is the speed of love. It goes on in the depths of our lives, whether we notice it or not, at 3 miles an hour. It's the speed we walk, and therefore it's the speed the love of God walks. Deep within his Jewish identity was this sense for Jesus that he belonged to a people who followed Yahweh, God of the way, a pilgrim people. God's sanctuary was the mobile ark, his house a movable tent, his altar a cairn of rough stones that could be erected and dismantled, and he led his people wandering on that nomadic journey for 40 years in the harsh environment of the desert, a crucible which formed and shaped them as a nation with a history, a story, and a memory. A pilgrim people, always remembering their physical walk, walking with the Lord, sometimes near, and yet sometimes also far off. So when we are on a pilgrimage, what might be the advice we take with us? Travel light has often been the advice that I've been given. I plan carefully, seeking to carry the minimal amount, even to make sure I have a near finished tube of toothpaste. And yet once home, I unpack my rucksack and check which things I really didn't need, the things I carried just in case, and there's always plenty of them. Jesus, who had nowhere to lay his head, urged his disciples to dispense with home and luxuries, taking nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, not even an extra tunic. There's a riskiness to that, to all pilgrimage. It opens us to our own vulnerabilities. Traveling light on a pilgrimage emphasizes our frailty and our need. As we declutter our life, if we move from our securities, even just for a few days. And as I decide what to take and what not to take, I find that something's going on internally, the laying down of particular things, the relinquishing of certain responsibilities, even if temporarily, a letting go of old securities that I tend to hang on to too much. Among the first pilgrims to set out in search of Jesus were the Magi. And of course, they came for their own particular reasons. In W.H. Auden's wonderful poem, For the Time Being, he imagines what those reasons might be. The first, who Auden imagined to be a scientist, said that he had traveled to discover how to be truthful now, is the reason I follow the star. The second for Auden was steeped in philosophy. He came with a thankfulness to discover how to be living now. The third gift bearer for Auden was a sociologist who, having searched high and low, hadn't been able to find a just and fair society, and concluded that his pilgrimage is to discover how to be loving now. And in the manger of Bethlehem, Auden's Magi discover what it is to live truthfully, to live thankfully, to live loving God and neighbor. And in unison, he has them say, to discover how to be human now is the reason to follow the star. For at the heart of pilgrimage is this question of, what are we encountering? What are we discovering in this time to breathe, to reflect on where we are, who we are, and where we're going? What are we encountering? What are we discovering? For in this experience that integrates body and soul, feet and faith, we seek and long to find, we knock and hope that the door will be open to us. Pilgrimage is not an escape from life. It is for me, and I know for countless others, a journey that goes deeper into life. And as was said in medieval times, for those who go on pilgrimage, if you don't travel with the king whom you seek, you will not find him at the end of your journey. When we're entering into a time of pilgrimage, we need to remind ourselves that God is with us as we walk, rather than just at the destination that we seek. Being prepared to meet God in the sweat and the dust along the way is vital. The secularity of the ordinary needs to mix with the sacredness of the holy. And I guess a clue to that is in the word pilgrim, with its derivation from the Latin word for strange or foreigner, peregrinus, made up of per, meaning through, and ega, meaning field or land. A pilgrim is therefore someone who leaves the comfort of their own home and hearth to travel beyond familiar boundaries, to cross through fields into new landscapes, to encounter the unknown with all its attendant risks and dangers, opportunities and surprises. So as such, we can look an odd bunch, inhabitants of another land wearing different clothes or speaking in a different accent or dialect or language. We become strangers potentially in the land. The land can be a stranger to us. We move into this liminal space, not quite part of where we are traveling through. And on a pilgrimage journey in search of a saint, there can be a surprising sense of presence as we walk. Perhaps even the long dead spiritual women and men we may seem to be looking out for are very much alive, willing to help us on our journey. We might even discover aspects of those saints' lives in the lives of those who journey with us or we encounter on the way. The gentle touch, the smile of encouragement, the sharing of food, the frustrated, harsh word, the smile that means everything. The evangelist's zeal, the exhausted legs that have walked for miles, or the beauty of a life we come across that is so focused on God. As we set off, we never know who we'll share the journey with. Some will not be those we might have ordinarily have chosen to follow in the way with. But might they be gifts to us on that journey? And of course, pilgrims go in search not only of others, but perhaps a story from the past. And in so doing, trace their own story through the landscape. We may have heard reports of what has happened in a particular place, and want to see for ourselves, to smell the air or taste its spirit, to breathe where holy men and women have breathed, to be up close where miracles have been witnessed or are still witnessed, or we hope will be witnessed in the future. Such places we approach with a certain hunger, whether to offer respect or to give thanks, to commemorate or to pay homage, to be healed or to seek forgiveness, to find something deeply precious that's been lost or has been elusive for a time. I'm reminded of St. Augustine's well-known words, "You made us for yourself, and our hearts find no peace until they rest in you." And so it's good to ask ourselves, what am I doing here? What does this place mean? And how does it speak to me of God? And then we return home to integrate the story of that journey into our own lives. For we often discover a remarkable depth of prayer along the way, or at holy places, or the tombs of saints. Our body can be filled with it from head to toe. But it's not just about the destination. As I've hinted at, getting home is as important as getting there. The journey out is the foundation, and on the journey back, when we've been influenced by our experiences, we see the route in a different way, from a different direction. Whatever the journey we've made, our lives will be changed. Our metaphorical pollen is worked into honey. And we're called to continue that long tradition of being a pilgrim people. I'm always so deeply moved that Jesus entrusted a small community, a tiny, fragile community, with his message. And those disciples, the early apostles, would change the world with that message. As the message gained legs, as other people encountered what God has done for us in the life and death and resurrection and ascension of his Son, Jesus Christ. And within just a few short years of his death, the words of Jesus would be walked to the ends of the known world. And as people were baptized, so the wet footprints of the totally immersed could be seen going in every direction, setting out on a lifetime of pilgrimage. So may your mini pilgrimages and may your lifelong walk with the Lord be for you as much as it's shaping out for me a joyous adventure.
Thank you very much. And I think we've now heard 3 talks, very different talks about pilgrimage, but there are some really strong, rich themes coming through now. Things about travelling light and how this might work back into our everyday lives. Something about a willingness to take risks, to step out bravely. Something about encounter, whether it is encountering ourselves, encountering those with whom we make the journey or those whom we meet on the journey, but also very, and you might have expected this, a very strong resonance with the Road to Emmaus story, with encountering Christ, with encountering God. And one of the reasons Sarah and I, when we first started thinking about this festival of pilgrimage, we were very certain that we wanted to include the word Christian, because we wanted an acknowledgement that this is Christian pilgrimage and that it is about an encounter, being open to encounter to God. And that has come through very strongly. There's also something about, I think, timing and speed and walking more slowly and being more aware of the landscape around us. And I know you, Bishop, have a real heart for the environment, for ecology. Do you just want to say a bit more about how pilgrimage can inform an increased awareness of the environment? I know when we were in lockdown, one of my churches is 2 miles from the other, and I made that walk every day. And as I did it day after day, I could really see the landscape as we moved from spring into summer, the landscape change and come alive. And it was an incredibly profound experience, one I would not have otherwise had because I would have gone somewhere else. But as I say, do you want to just kind of expand a bit on pilgrimage and environment, ecology?
Sally, thank you very much. And what a joy it's been to be part of this amazing festival that you've been so creative in putting together in this new way. Well, I think you're right. Lots of people were reflecting on how during lockdown they saw the spring unfold, hearing birdsong, as I think I said in my talk. And there is that sense of, and I think the Archbishop of York alluded to this, of seeing more clearly, because we're simply walking and going more slowly.
there is the sense you can stop and start. You can take a close look at something that you just see in the corner of your eye, and have a greater sense of appreciation. I'm very conscious. John Ruskin was really the person who saw so attentively, and of course it's the skill of so many artists in that. I think in learning to draw is about learning to really see the detail and be attentive. So when you are attentive to the natural world, when you take in things where you see the rhythm of the seasons, of how birds are building their nests, you see the clues in the landscape to all sorts of natural things that are going on, and the clues in the landscape perhaps to the history of that area, of the field systems, of hedgerows, of our inner cities, and how they've been created and made within the landscape. Then I think there's a sense of our human response is, well, how can we protect the wonderful things that we see? How can we enhance where we come across litter and other aspects that are not good for the environment, where that you see people and very gladly picking things up as they go along. So I think there is a sense of our human response to the natural world needs to and can respond so that we learn to tread more gently on the earth. It fills us with ultimately a sense of awe and wonder, and I think awe and wonder are integral to how we in the future and of today create a better environment for biodiversity and for our planet.
Thank you. Yes. One of a theme that I think kind of ties in with that and was mentioned, particularly discussed by Sarah and Stephen, was the whole idea of the lockdown having forced us really to focus more on the local. So instead of seeing wider in some respects, we were actually bringing our attention down to our near neighbourhood. And some of the questions and comments that are coming through are about how to bring the pilgrimage theme alive, if you like, to our local communities and local congregations. Do you just want to say a bit about that? And with particular reference, I know Norwich the diocese has got a real heart for pilgrimage, and there are lots of really good pilgrimage initiatives going on in your diocese. Would you just like to expand on that?
Well, here it's really been led so brilliantly by Peter Dole, one of the residentiary canons at the cathedral, who has done remarkable work, and with a group of other people has led on creating a pilgrimage route from Norwich Cathedral and from the shrine of Julian to the shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. And it's a great route. I walked it earlier in the summer as a prayer over 3 days for an end to this pandemic, and praying for the people from this diocese who've died from COVID. And I was joined on that route with other people as I went along, and that was a great joy to witness that. And there is a sense here of enjoying and taking part in pilgrimages, which of course links so much to the history of both of those places. Of course, Marjorie Kemp came to visit Mother Julian at in her anchorage here in Norwich. A long tradition of visiting holy people and holy places. So I'm just sort of keen to encourage not only the historic pilgrim routes, but also to encourage a sense of pilgrimage in people's daily life. So perhaps having a prayer walk around your neighborhood, praying for situations and sites, using the kind of raw material of your walk, of signage and notices and posters or things you observe, to draw into a prayer as part of a daily walk. Also, within the liturgy of the church, we mustn't forget that so many of our liturgies are ultimately about being a pilgrim people, as we move through a church building from font to altar, as we live out, reenact a journey at significant points in the seasonal liturgical year of Ash Wednesday, or the events of Holy Week, of Pentecost. all of these, the Advent procession, can all be part of a sense of being a pilgrim people of God.
Thank you. Yes, and we're hoping that our website, which will be, I don't know, unveiling something later on this afternoon, will also be a forum where people can post resources and use resources for themselves, which will help local churches and local communities engage more in pilgrimage. So we're hoping it will be kind of a resource hub, so that all the good ideas that some people are having can be used and adapted and used creatively in other areas. And I think we will also be talking a bit more about how it's, for those of us who can't necessarily walk all the way to Santiago de Compostela, how we can bring in a pilgrimage spirituality to our everyday lives, which I know is something that you have been working on, and which every speaker actually has kind of reinforced, the pilgrim spirit. Are you prepared to say a bit about how you engage with pilgrimage spirituality in your daily life?
Well, I think it's, for me, it's knowing that I'm on a lifelong journey as a disciple of Jesus Christ. That's where it begins. I've the joy of this journey is I never arrive. I will arrive, God willing, I hope, on the day of my death. And part of the joy of this journey is this continued, for me, unfolding of dwelling under Scripture, of dwelling in this presence of the Spirit, to be led on a journey that is always enlightening. And I draw from that the insights of the holy mothers and fathers of the church of the past, of contemporary pilgrims on the way, who I always have learnt hugely from. And I'm conscious that that's any talk of pilgrimage in terms of physical movement. I worry deeply that could also be excluding, that there are those who aren't able to leave their armchairs, who aren't able to leave their homes for various reasons, who aren't able to walk. I'm very conscious, when I was a parish priest in Northumberland, probably the most holiest of parishioners that I had was sort of an amazing woman who never left her armchair in the last stages of her life. She even slept in it, and yet she was one of the holiest people I've come across, and was devoted to prayer, a prayer of intercession for the life of the parish, and very much spoke of being a pilgrim on the way. And we mentioned, I think, in an earlier session with Archbishop Stephen, he was asked whether he tweeted on the way, and I don't tend to, but I did on the pilgrimage I made to Walsingham from Norwich back in July, and it had the very surprising consequence that a number of people they joined me on pilgrimage, but from their own homes, and they were shielding, or whatever reason they couldn't leave their own home, and they were actually taking part in that journey. And I had never realized that would be something that would be a consequence of tweeting a few tweets each day along that journey, a few reflections to support people. I thought I was just sharing something, but actually it was a deeper spiritual moment for some of those who were following.
Yes, and I, in our deanery, a very keen pilgrim during lockdown couldn't do the pilgrim paths that we had set up. So instead, put up the route description and photographs of the route, so people could follow it from their armchairs and their imagination. Which kind of brings me on a comment you made at the beginning of your talk about some people. There's people who want to walk. There are people who want to walk but are unable to. But you also said some people walk because they have to. Do you want to just open that statement out a bit?
Well, I think for some, perhaps even for myself, that spirituality may be very connected with a sense of walking. And I guess what I was trying to say there was that for some, their prayer is enhanced by the sense of going towards a very physical destination, perhaps in the company of or searching out for somebody who had a significant life in that place, or a particular life of holiness, or where a particular event has happened. And that can draw them into a deeper sense of relationship with God. You mentioned the Emmaus Road story earlier, and I keep being drawn back to that story within reflections of pilgrimage. It just is so rich in its textures, and of course we mustn't forget that those disciples, as they had left Jerusalem, were mournful, were despondent. I'm no Greek scholar, but I understand that the Greek words change for what they're first of all talking with each other, and then arguing with each other, and then literally it says that they're literally sort of kind of throwing words at each other. It became a really heated argument, and yet within that space, as they moved away from Jerusalem, perhaps in search of their former lives, perhaps we just don't know. We don't know who they were. We just know the name of one of them. But into that comes Jesus, and not recognized at first, but at a pause in the journey, as they stop, and as bread is broken, they recognize him in their midst. I think for some people, seeing our Christian journey, both week by week, but also longitudinally through our lives, as something of that pilgrim journey, where we stop from time to time and recognize that Christ has been with us along the journey, is important.
And picking up on a comment that's just come up, you talk about on the road to Emmaus, they were walking away from Jerusalem, and somebody said there are lots of lovely images of hedgerows and birdsong. Any thoughts of pilgrimage in an urban environment? Now, I'm in rural ministry, have spent most of my time in rural ministry, so my response is kind of, well, get out of the city and come and visit us out in the sticks. But I expect you can say something more constructive about pilgrimage in an urban environment.
Well, I'm not very sure if I can, other than drawing on my own experience of living here in the centre of Norwich, and each day of lockdown, I tried to get out for my half an hour of walking to a different part of the city, and I learned a lot about the city just by simply walking, generally early in the morning, around, observing signs and seeing what was around. And Mother Julian's Shrine was about 15 minutes walk from here, so I could get there and back in half an hour. And as a parish priest in the centre of Middlesbrough years ago, we had parish prayer pilgrimages around the parish, a very densely populated area, Victorian back-to-backs, and then lots of area where houses had been demolished and taken away, and a small group of people praying as they walked, as we walked around the parish, praying for people who lived in different streets and the situations and the context of that place. I imagine it's also, and others will be able to speak much better than me about this, but it's about noticing the little moments of gracious gift, in every context that we're in. What's the sacrament of the present moment in this place that I'm in at the moment?
And it's worth noticing also the long distance pilgrim routes that I have walked, which often end up in a big city, for example, Santiago de Compostela. You have to go through an awful lot of suburban, urban, and sometimes industrialized landscape. So there is a kind of a balance between the rural and the urban. But sticking with the rural, sorry.
And it's not to rush through the industrial and the wasteland and the areas to try and get to the rural, because that somehow better or prettier or nicer to be in. I want to ask the question, what's God's gift to us here in this place that we are now? If you walk from London to Canterbury, you pass by all the kind of backside of London, all the junkyards where the sewerage happens is sorted, where all the rubbish of London gets sorted as you go out towards the Dartmouth Bridge, and that is not an incredibly attractive area at all, but it becomes part of the letting go and the taking up of a pilgrimage from London to Canterbury, part of the raw material of what one might be thinking of as you set off on that pilgrimage journey.
And valuing it all for all its differences.
Or lamenting it as well. And we started this conversation about the environment, and actually when you see some of these landscapes where things are despoiled, well, some are about recycling and reusing, but there's a lament to what we've done in terms of damage to much of our landscape as well.
And following slightly on that theme, you said that the road is where Jesus is to be found. I'm just looking across at my notes here, his classroom and his sanctuary. And of course, what struck me instantly was what does that then say about churches, particularly small ones, of which you have 656, and their significance, because I think particularly for rural ministers at this time, there's a real concern about small holy places and what might be their future.
Well, I think we've got to recognise that every church is a treasure trove of memory of a local community, should be a precious holy place set aside, a place that's treasured by that locality and that community. What I'm interested in Norfolk is I come across a large number of, beyond our 656 churches, a large number of medieval churches that are now ruins, which is very, very interesting. In the middle of fields, I come across them, and I ask myself, what's the story here? Where is God to be found here? Where has God been found here? What's the story why this place is no longer a place where Christians gather to praise God amongst us? And so I think there's some big questions there about the survival, the resourcing, the flourishing of the rural church. But let's not forget, they're a bit like cairns on a mountainside. They can so often lead the way, be a place of where they're places of invitation, of welcome. And it's been remarkable here in Norfolk to see how many of our churches have very quickly reopened for people to just simply go and be still and silent, to encounter. So let's celebrate them and not see them as great millstones, as some may wish to see, but celebrate them as, I hope and pray, living places of the living God who can be encountered each and every day along a journey.
Yes, absolutely. Just coming to the end now, I have somebody has said asked whether prayer walks can be classed as acts of worship. That's really a question for your Archdeacon. I haven't got a clue.
As long as less than 6, I think.
Yes, fewer than 6. Don't know. You also mentioned, just one last thing, you asked the question, what would the church look like if foot washing had become the sacrament? Foot washing was what was done in remembrance of me. For you, what would your church look like if foot washing had become a sacramental act?
I would hope it would be a humbler, simpler church that stoops down to be with the lost, the least, and the lonely. I would hope that in that act, and I I find that on Maundy Thursday each year, and as a bishop, I've been very privileged to sometimes be in prisons on Maundy Thursday and wash the feet of prisoners, and it's moved me to tears each time, as it did as a parish priest of washing parishioners' feet, and sometimes parishioners who I rejoiced in, and sometimes parishioners who I found mighty difficult to live together with in a community following Jesus, but always profoundly moved me. And I would hope that in that very act where you physically need to stoop down lower, where you take very simple things of a water, of the refreshment of a towel, and you touch the bits of our bodies that we think are ugly. We think we hide away under socks and shoes and don't like to show. I was very moved when I stayed with the Bedouin a couple of years ago in the Judean desert, and was out, spent a day out with the herdsmen in the desert, moving very slowly, really, with a flock of sheep and goats from place to place as they looked for vegetation for the animals. And on the evening, we came back to the black tents and sat at the entrance to the tent, and water was brought and feet were washed before we then dipped bread into a common big open pot of stew for our evening meal. So humbler, simpler. I just wonder what that would say to the world about our ministry of service, of genuinely wanting to be alongside and with people. It might then influence so many other ways that we want to be, or feel called to be, are called to be church.
Thank you. What a wonderful note on which to pause for lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are returning at 2. We're returning at 2:00. Go off, eat lunch, go wild, reflect about pilgrimage, and we'll see you again at lunchtime. After lunch.